Outside the Box Reviews, we are taking a look at the SH Monsterarts Tamashii Nations Godzilla 1964. And this is the costume scene in the classic Godzilla film, Mothra vs. Godzilla. This is technically the third Godzilla figure we've gotten from SH Monsterarts. We got the Heisei era Godzilla suit, which Heisei basically refers to the era in Japan in which the movies were made, that being basically the 90s. And then they had the San Diego Comic-Con exclusive and the Godzilla vs. Destoroyah version, which I will basically claim were both based on the movie Godzilla vs. Destoroyah from 1995. But this is the first time we're going back to the original era of Godzilla films, the Showa era, which is the movies within 1954 to 1975. And the Mosugoji suit, which is what this is nicknamed, is a fan favorite, and I'm very excited to take a closer look at this figure. Now, for whatever reason, this camera does not seem to identify the head of this figure as being a head and does not want to focus on it, but it has some great detail on it. If you take a look at him, it has that classic Godzilla vs. Mothra head on there. It very much looks like the film. He has the big heavy brow. He has kind of the almost dead looking eyes positioned way up at the top of the eye socket, which is very iconic to the film. He has a little pug nose going on, and the inside of the mouth is just awesome. He has his tongue in there and lots of sharp individually sculpted teeth. And then when you close his mouth, the fangs actually sit over the lower jaw and kind of protrude and look very, very cool. He has a fairly long neck. You can see the beginning of the spine starting all the way at the top of the head going down. There's a different texture for the underside of the neck, which is true to the film. And I want to say it's there, but it's not really as well sculpted in here. The image on the box, which I believe was a drawing, actually did have it a little more prominent, but you can almost get the vague impression of the little holes that would be in the neck for the actor to see out of, but they're not really sculpted in there. Going down the back, we see he has the shorter row of spines on the outside with the much larger one on the inside here. They look great. I love the sculpt on these, and I love the paint on them. The kind of frosted edges and almost a greenish gray with the darker middle. Looks really, really cool, really organic. Unfortunately, the way he's built, he has this gap here between these two spines that you can't really close. He won't articulate back any further than this. So he kind of does have a breakup in the spines, but not a huge issue, but just something to kind of be aware of. He has one large spine on this front section of the tail, and then the rest of the tail just has the shorter little spines on it. Very nicely detailed. Not quite as long as the other Godzilla's tail, but a very nice one. Great skin texture all over. And the smoother underside here, which is once again very movie accurate. Take a look at it from the other side. Equally good detail there. We come around to the front. It looks a lot like the suit. It's got the little stripe down here in the center of the chest, which is almost a greenish, which is very cool. It's a very charcoal Godzilla figure, which is accurate to the film, but these little grayish green highlights on it, you can see on the knees as well. It really brings out the look of the movie to me, and it gives a great color variation that you wouldn't really get without it. The hands are well done. On the other Godzilla I have, the 90s Godzilla, that was an area I wasn't super happy with, but these look really, really nice. They have a great coloration to them, and the hands look natural. They look like the actual suit hands. So I think that's very, very well done. Coming down here to the toes, they are really well detailed. I really like the way the foot's sculpted. It has the 3 toes, which is movie accurate. Some of the middle Godzilla films had this, but very, very cool looking. I like the paint colors they chose for it. It's kind of a greenish yellow, and the toes almost looked a little webbed, but that's how they were in the film. Now, of course, this figure is loaded with articulation, and to some that's awesome, and to others that's kind of crummy, because it really does cause some issues with the sculpt. We already talked about the spine gap here that I assume is theoretically an articulation problem, even though it wouldn't hinder articulation one way or another. If he did rotate back further, I would see that actually being a problem, but he won't hold that pose, so it doesn't really matter. But you can see there are a lot of seams and gaps here, and if you get him into extreme poses, the gaps become very, very noticeable. But in my mind, while this thing can do some extreme poses, it's not accurate to the movie, and it's not something I'm particularly tempted to do. Godzilla as a costume was not something you could move too easily in, and doing the splits or doing high kicks and stuff, really not setting in character with him unless you're counting the dance he does in Invasion of the Astro Monsters. But we're not talking about that right now. But for articulation, he has a ball joint at the base of the head. He has an articulated jaw, which is a little weird because it will open up just fine. But then when you go to close it, he gets a pose that I actually really like with just the slightly opened mouth, but you kind of have to add a little extra pressure to get it to close the rest of the way. He has several joints along the neck. This top joint really doesn't do much of anything. It can rotate a little bit, but not much, and it doesn't really bend, so it's kind of unnecessary. The main joint at the base of the neck allows a lot more flexibility. Ball joint at the shoulders. It doesn't go out a whole lot, but you can rotate it just fine. He has a double jointed elbow, so it can bend there. All of this is done with ball joints pretty much, so you get bends and rotations pretty much everywhere there is a bend. The hands are ball jointed, however, this hand on mine, his right hand, has a tendency to pop off. It just won't stay in the socket. It's staying really well right now, but it just has a tendency when I'm posing it to, come off just like that. He, of course, can swivel and crunch here at the abdomen. The legs have a ridiculous amount of articulation. He has this huge joint here on the side that can go in and out really well, which is a little more extreme than Godzilla could actually do in the film. He can bend and rotate here at the hip, double jointed at the knee, ball joint at the foot, and then not something you can move too easily, but he does have a joint here at the toe. And then as with any good Godzilla figure, we have a ton of articulation here at the tail. Each one of these segments is an individual ball jointed segment. They could all, of course, rotate and, of course, swivel side to side, up and down. Of course, you have to be careful, they'll pop apart, but this one isn't nearly as bad as some of the other Monsterarts figures when it comes to popping apart. But great range of motion. The other Godzilla figure I have actually ends maybe about here, and this whole last section of his tail is one piece. But here, each little individual segment is its own joint, could rotate and turn, except for this last little bit at the end. This one appears to be all one piece. So this section here is a solid piece, as opposed to a much larger section that we got on the previous released Godzilla. So I'm very happy about that. You can get some great tail poses. The joints are nice and stiff on this figure overall, so you can actually get a lot of good poses and have him hold them and not just flop back down. And here we have him next to the 90s SH Monsterarts Godzilla and the Bandai Creation original Godzilla, and you can see both these guys are a heck of a lot taller, so he's not really in scale theoretically with the rest, but being that Godzilla was portrayed smaller in the older movies, this kinda works. There's a little better comparison between the Monsterarts versions there. You can see he comes out about to 90s version's shoulder. Overall, I really like this figure. While he may be a little on the small side, he's still very cool looking. The detail's great, the paint's great, the articulation is good, and I'm just overall very impressed with him. And I highly recommend him. A lot of people have differing opinions on the Monsterarts line. Some people love them, some people hate them. Some people can't get past all the gaps when you have the articulation. I personally like an articulated figure. I like posing my figures and doing different things with them. I get kind of bored with statue-like figures. So to me, this is what I want in a Godzilla collectible. This is very cool. So once again, if you're into this line, definitely one I'd recommend picking up, one I've had a lot of fun with in the time I've had him so far, and I know I'm going to do some cool, crazy poses with him in the future. I also am ordering the Revoltech Rodan and Baragon. I believe they may be close to in scale with him. I got a good deal on them, so I'm going to check out and see if those guys will fit with him, and I can kind of round out a Showa-era Godzilla display using that. One thing I'd kind of like to see with this figure, there were some subtle variations given to this costume over the years. The costume display in this figure specifically relates to Mothra versus Godzilla, but the costume was basically reused the next year in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. It was some retweaks to the head, so not quite the same head. This would be, I think, passable for a display if you were setting one up for that movie, but it would be kind of cool to get that head as an accessory. And kind of brings me to a big point of disappointment on this figure, is that where have all the cool accessories gone? The earlier figures I picked up came with tons and tons of stuff, and it seems like these later releases come with nothing, and the price hasn't gone down any. The breath effect on Godzilla in the early movies looked a lot different. It wasn't nearly as animated looking as the modern one. And plus, the only one I ever have, because I didn't get the first release of that Godzilla figure, is the red fiery version. So that really doesn't work with this guy. So a new breath effect would have been really cool to come with him. As I said, the other head to make him the 1964 and 1965 version. I think that would have been really cool. And then something I think would be cool as a fan release, you know, one of those kind of like bootleg add-on accessories to your figure type things, would have been a couple extra looks for this figure from outside the Godzilla universe. Eiji Tsuburaya, the man who created the Godzilla costumes and pretty much most of the special effects for the early films, went and did his own little TV project around this time as well, making several TV shows like Ultra Q and Ultraman, and they took this Godzilla costume and used it for a couple of the episodes. And what I believe was the first episode of Ultra Q, they fitted this with some kind of like turtle-like armor in the front and a head with big tusks and spikes on it. They also messed with the tail a little bit, I believe, too. And it was known as Gomez. But that was basically this exact same Godzilla with a lot of modifications made to him. So it'd be neat if there was a fan pack where you could pop off the head and put on the new one and put on the body armor to him and make the Ultra Q monster. And he also did appear in Ultraman, I believe. And then later with the other head, the Ghidra the three-headed monster head, they put a big lizard frill on him and called him Jiris. And I think that would have been kind of a cool one too, just to give a little variety to this figure, whether it be an official release or be something more homebrew. It'd be kind of anything to do with this figure. Also, I know I'm going on a little long with my wish list here for this, but pretty much the entire time I've been collecting these Monsterarts figures, I've been dying for a Mothra, and we are finally getting one. And fittingly, it is the Heisei 90s era Mothra, but because we got this Godzilla specifically, now we have to beg for a Showa Mothra. It kind of has to happen now too, so there might be another Mothra coming down the line, judging by this decision. Though, quite honestly, for the Showa films, I'd be probably just as happy with a Mothra larva instead. Make sure you check out Outside the Box Reviews on Facebook. There'll be a link below. Also, check out Outside the Box Reviews on Instagram. Username Outside the Box Reviews. And until next time, another Outside the Box Reviews, and stay tuned for more to come. Come on, focus for me. Focus! Oh, come on. And then the smoother. Come on. Focus on something. There we go. Really? I have to have my hands behind it?
If you collect it, you can find it at allscaleseverything.com.